By the time Gabriel Vale's fiancée called him to discuss flowers, he had already spent the better part of his day choosing which longshoreman to save, which foreman to silence, which liar to ruin, and which version of the truth would be most useful before sunset. That was how power worked around him. Not as one clean decision, but as a chain of smaller brutal calculations, each one polished until it almost looked respectable. The call came while he sat in the back room of Pier 9. A room that smelled of salt, diesel, wet rope, old wood, cold coffee, and the kind of threats that had been made so often they had become part of the walls. Across from him, a Union captain with a scar dragged across his mouth was explaining how 3 containers had vanished somewhere between Newark and Halifax. But Gabriel only half listened. He had heard too many versions of panic in his life to be distracted by one more. Evelyn, on the other end, cared about flowers with the intensity other people reserved for surgery or war. She believed a wrong arrangement could communicate weakness, poor breeding, emotional fatigue, or worse, a lack of aesthetic discipline. She had once spent 40 minutes rejecting 12 shades of white because none of them matched the kind of purity she wanted guests to imagine when they walked into the chapel. Winter white, she said. Crisp and certain, not cream. Cream looks tired. It looks as if the room has already apologized for itself. Gabriel checked his watch, stared through the dusty window at the gray river beyond the loading cranes, and answered in the distracted voice of a man who had spent too long telling grown men whether they would keep their jobs. Then use white. And the chapel candles, she continued. The planner says tapers are more traditional, but pillars look stronger in photographs. And your aunt insists the silver candelabras belong near the first row, which I think is vulgar. Whatever you want, Gabriel said. There was a pause. Then that little sound she made when annoyed and amused at the same time, half affection, half insult. Sometimes I think I could replace you with a wire transfer and a signature. You almost have, he replied. She laughed softly, the sound elegant even through a phone line. And for one second he felt the familiar strange calm that came with her, not warmth exactly, never softness, but the relief of being with someone who understood that life was leverage and design, not sentiment. Then the laugh faded. He heard movement, distant heels over polished marble, the airy hush of a large foyer, a door closing somewhere on her end. Then silence. She had forgotten to hang up. At first he meant to end the call. He even shifted the phone from one ear to the other and glanced down at the screen. But then he heard her voice change. The warmth vanished. The charm went with it. What remained was the efficient blade underneath, cool, clipped, practical. The voice of a woman who had spent years learning how to smile above a knife. Listen carefully, Ophelia, Evelyn said. If Mr. Vale asks why the chapel key is missing, you tell him the locksmith still has it. If Nora Mercer asks to look beneath the altar, you say the floor is unstable. And if Gabriel finds the green dress before Saturday, the marriage is over. Across the table, the Union captain stopped talking. Gabriel did not realize how still he had gone until the man across from him shifted in his chair as though he had just seen a ghost sit up. A much older voice answered on the line, trembling with dread. Miss Evelyn. I don't want to lie to him anymore. You lied for 30 years, Evelyn said without raising her tone. You can manage 4 more days. A silence followed, thick enough to feel. Then the older woman spoke again, lower this time. Your father promised nobody else would get hurt. My father promised a great many things, Evelyn replied. What matters now is this, he can never know Teresa didn't run. Gabriel forgot to breathe. His mother's name, after 30 years, not in memory. Not in an old photograph, not in some half-cautious family euphemism, but spoken plainly in his own fiancée's hidden voice. In the halls of his own house, Ophelia made a broken sound. She wanted him to know. Evelyn's answer came sharp as glass. She wanted him to know when the house was safe. It was never safe. And if he hears that tape before the marriage license is filed, he won't just cancel the wedding, he will tear open the chapel. The trust, my father, your old mistress, his dead father, everything. Half this city was built on what's under that floor. Gabriel stared into the dark pane behind the Union captain and saw not his reflection, but a boy of 11 waiting in a long corridor with one sock half fallen and his school coat still on, listening for footsteps that never returned. "Do you understand me?" Evelyn asked. "Yes," Ophelia whispered. "Good. And make sure Mr. Cruz gets the hospital deposit tonight." The line went dead. Gabriel sat with the phone against his ear long after the connection ended. Around him the room held its breath. The men by the door did not move. The captain did not dare continue. Somewhere outside over the water a ship horn sounded. Long and low, ancient as grief, half this city was built on what's under that floor. Gabriel placed the phone carefully into his jacket pocket and rose. The Union captain swallowed. "Mr. Vale." Gabriel buttoned his coat with steady hands. "The missing containers are no longer the most important problem in my life." He walked out without another word. And by the time the black sedan turned north toward Blackwater House, one terrible clarity had already settled in his chest. His mother had not abandoned him. Someone had buried the truth. And the woman he was meant to marry had been standing on that grave. Blackwater House stood above the Hudson like an old judgment that had never been appealed. At night the estate looked less like a home and more like a verdict made of stone, 30 rooms of gray masonry. Tall windows, copper gutters, iron balconies. And lawns so carefully kept they seemed less grown than supervised. Gabriel had grown up there. Had learned to read there. Lie there, swallow anger there, bury softness there. And not once in all those years had the place ever felt safe. When he arrived, dusk had already settled into the trees. Tent lights glowed across the south lawn where the wedding reception had been planned. A florist's van idled by the side drive. Somewhere in the rear garden, a quartet rehearsed for the ceremony. The music drifting thin and sorrowful through the cold air, elegant enough to sound expensive, empty enough to sound doomed. He stepped out alone, told the driver to keep the engine running, and entered the house. Inside, the foyer smelled of cedar smoke, beeswax, cut lily, and old wealth. Portraits of dead Vales watched from the walls with the usual family expressions. The men severe, the women tired, the children painted into obedience before life had taught it to them properly. Evelyn stood at the base of the grand staircase in a charcoal dress. A folder in one hand, her gold hair pinned low at the nape of her neck. She belonged to that class of beauty which did not invite admiration so much as assume it. Pale skin, gray eyes, clean lines. A face made for winter and strategy. The moment she saw him, relief crossed her face so flawlessly, he might have believed it if he had not already heard the other version of her voice. "There you are," she said. "I was beginning to think you had abandoned me to clergy. Lynn's, and your aunt's opinions." He kissed her cheek. She smelled of bergamot and winter roses. "I had business," he said. "You always have business," she murmured, smoothing his lapel. Then she looked into his face 1 second too long, searching, measuring, wondering perhaps whether she had been overheard. Whether a silence on a dead phone line could still have ears. From the west archway Ophelia appeared with a tray in her hands. She was 61, broad-shouldered. Short, soft brown skin, silver threaded through dark hair. A face marked by work and loyalty and old fear. She had entered the house when Gabriel was 10. After his mother disappeared and his father turned more ghost than parent, Ophelia had become the nearest thing to safety the place contained. She knew which silences in him meant anger, which meant exhaustion, which meant he needed to be left alone with the dark until it passed. Their eyes met. The tray rattled once. "Mr. Vale," she said. "Ophelia." Gabriel answered. Evelyn turned lightly. "I asked her to bring tea. But no one in this house can find the chapel key, can you imagine?" 4 days before the wedding. Gabriel looked at Evelyn. Then at Ophelia. "No," he said softly. "I can't imagine." For a fraction of a second. Evelyn hesitated. Then the mask returned. "Your grandmother kept every useless key from 1947 and somehow misplaced the only one we actually need. My old mistress," Evelyn had said on the phone. "Not grandmother, not Sophia, but my old mistress." The phrase of a servant, a witness. A loyal woman with intimate wounds. Gabriel turned to Ophelia. Did the locksmith take it? Ophelia's fingers clenched around the tray. Yes, sir. Of course, Gabriel said. Then he walked past them toward the west wing. Gabriel, Evelyn called after him. He paused but did not turn fully. Charles and the board are arriving at 8. Don't disappear. He glanced back over his shoulder. That depends on what I find. By the time he reached the chapel at the far end of the covered stone walkway, the mist had begun to settle along the pines. The family chapel stood apart from the house like a private conscience nobody used anymore. He had been baptized there, buried his father there, watched his grandmother kneel there every Sunday long after everyone else in the family had stopped believing in anything except leverage. The door was locked. He checked the handle twice anyway. Above him the stained glass saints glimmered dimly in the failing light. Wind moved through the black pines overhead. The lock was cold under his hand. At 11 he had been told his mother left because she could not bear the weight of their life. At 13 he learned people watched his face when they mentioned her. At 16 he stopped asking. At 25 when Salvatore Vale died at his desk with 3 telephones ringing and half the harbor waiting for instructions, Gabriel inherited the house. The empire. The dock crews. The shell companies. The fear and the silence. He kept the silence because it was cheaper than grief. Now he touched the lock and wondered what silence had cost everyone else. If you force it, the frame may crack, a woman's voice said from behind him. He turned. A woman stood near the edge of the walkway beneath a work lamp, one hand hooked into the belt loop of worn jeans, the other carrying a canvas tube of plans, dark wool coat over a thermal shirt, work boots dusted with plaster, dark hair pulled back carelessly. Not to flatter her face but to keep it from interfering with thought. Her eyes were the uncertain blue of winter water. Her face not young, not old. Made for honesty more than charm, Nora Mercer, she said. You hired my firm to inspect the chapel before 100 rich people stand in it pretending not to hate one another. You're late, Gabriel said. You changed the access time twice, she replied. And your security man searched my truck like I was carrying dynamite in a tile saw. Were you? That earned the smallest shadow of a smile. Only emotionally. She crouched beside the jamb. Ran rough precise fingers along the lower hinge, studied the threshold. The worn arc of the door's movement, the dust. No recent tool marks, she murmured. Door hasn't been forced. Threshold's dragging. Someone's been opening and closing this more than usual. Can you get inside? Gabriel asked. Can I? Yes, legally. Depends on whether the owner wants answers or peace. That's becoming less clear to me, he said. She rose and looked at him fully then, not leaning toward him. Not shrinking back, simply assessing. As if he were another unstable structure with fine materials and compromised foundations. Well, she said, if this is a structural inspection, I need written authorization if this is family drama. I charge extra. Double it, he said. Triple. Done. That brought a flicker of dry amusement. Tomorrow morning then, daylight tools. Less melodrama. She started to go. Ms. Mercer, Gabriel said. She stopped. Has anyone asked you not to look beneath the altar? She turned slowly. Yes. Who? A woman in pearls. And a man in a suit expensive enough to have opinions about limestone, she answered. They said the subfloor had water damage and shouldn't be disturbed before the ceremony. Which was interesting because I hadn't inspected it yet. Meaning either they're psychic or they're lying. Which do you usually bet on? People lie more often than God performs previews, she said. Then walked back toward the drive. Gabriel remained by the locked chapel until the last note from the rehearsal strings dissolved into the cold air. Then he turned toward the house and went looking for Ophelia. He found her in the service pantry just off the kitchen, alone beneath a bright overhead light, wrapping china cups in linen as if prayer could protect porcelain from consequences. The old wall clock above the shelves was still 3 minutes slow, just as it had been since before he was born. Put that down, Gabriel said. She flinched, then obeyed. For a moment neither spoke. Finally she asked, "Did you hear me on the phone?" "Yes," he said. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Start with one thing," Gabriel replied. Voice low, controlled, dangerous in its quiet. "Did my mother run?" Ophelia's mouth trembled. "No." The answer hit him physically. As if something inside him had been struck with iron. "She packed a bag," Ophelia whispered. "She meant to leave that night, but not to abandon you." "Never that." "Then what happened?" "She found papers. And a recording, things your father wanted hidden. She said if they came into daylight he would lose more than money. He would lose the story he told about himself." Gabriel stared at her. "My father had a dozen stories about himself." Which one was she trying to kill? Ophelia looked up then. And there was something like anger in her grief. The one where he built everything with his own hands. Didn't he? "No man builds a fortune with his own hands," she said. "Not when there are always other hands underneath, hands unpaid, hands threatened." Hands erased. The kitchen beyond the door clattered faintly. A dishwasher slammed. Somebody laughed too loudly at something trivial. Normal life continuing one room away from the collapse of an old lie. "What's under the chapel?" Gabriel asked. She shook her head. "Not all of it is still there, so there was something, yes," she said. "Your grandmother moved things after your mother disappeared. My grandmother knew." "Yes." "How much?" "Enough to be ashamed. Not enough to tell me. She wanted to. Many times. But she didn't." "No." He crossed the pantry in 2 strides and stopped at the door before rage could choose a shape for him. "Why?" he demanded. "Why keep it from me?" Ophelia covered her mouth with her hand. Then lowered it and forced the words out. "Because your father said if your mother went to the authorities he would take Leo away. He had doctors ready, men who would say your brother was unstable. Unsafe, unfit. He would have put him somewhere terrible. Your mother was trying to get both of you out before he noticed." "I told the wrong person she was packing." Gabriel turned slowly. "Who?" "Your grandmother," Ophelia said. Tears finally falling. "I thought she would help. I thought she loved Teresa enough to stop Salvatore. Sophia went to him first. Later she said it was to bargain for the boys. But by then it was too late." He felt the room tilt. "What happened to my mother?" Ophelia looked down at the folded linen in her hands, as though the answer were stitched into it. "I don't know exactly," she whispered. "Only that she never made the train." That night the dining room filled with polished people discussing salmon, seating cards, fundraising optics, clergy preferences, development timelines, and the exact shade of the runner leading into the chapel. Gabriel sat at the head of the table with the calm face of a man nobody should interrupt unless prepared to lose something. Charles Thorne sat midway down on Evelyn's side, silver-haired, immaculate. Rich in the way that had long ago become a form of hygiene. His voice soft, his hands steady only when clasped around a glass. Leo sat 2 seats from Gabriel. Tall inward, careful, one hand near his water glass. Listening to the room the way some people listen to music. For pattern, dissonance, hidden pressure. During the soup course, Charles said, "The city would like confirmation on Friday morning. If we are moving forward with the pier redevelopment announcement, the mayor's office prefers not to be surprised. The city can survive surprise," Gabriel answered. "Markets prefer stability," Charles replied. Aunt Viola in black silk and nicotine muttered, "If markets are so delicate, let them marry your daughter instead." Evelyn ignored her, but Leo looked up suddenly and said, "She changed the flowers in the chapel." A small silence descended. Evelyn smiled. "Only the arrangements." The white hydrangeas were collapsing. Leo blinked. "No, the lily by the altar. My mother used to tie green ribbon around them." Nobody spoke. At the doorway, Ophelia froze with the wine bottle in her hand. Evelyn folded her napkin with excessive precision. "That was a long time ago." Leo lowered his eyes, but Gabriel saw the distress there. the fragile pressure of memory trying to force its way through a locked door. Later, near the library, Gabriel stopped Evelyn in the corridor. "You said half the city was built on what's under the chapel floor," he said. "Tell me why." She went very still. "So you did hear," she said. "Yes." She glanced toward the drawing room where laughter drifted like something tasteless and expensive. Then back to him. "There are documents, old ones. References surfaced after your grandmother's death, property records, testimony. A trust your mother persuaded Sophia to sign and never filed." "What kind of trust?" "A restitution trust," she said. "For families displaced from Blackwater Row. And for household staff whose pension fund was raided during the acquisition years. If those documents surface, the claims reopen. The estate is exposed. Waterfront subsidiaries become targets. The redevelopment deal dies. The board fractures. The city panics, your workers panic, your brother becomes a headline. You become your father's obituary." "And my mother?" Gabriel asked. Evelyn's face shifted, regret entering it without innocence. "She found the documents. She meant to expose everything. Planned to," he repeated. Past tense. "We don't know exactly what happened. Don't insult me," he said. She flinched very slightly. "Your father is dead. Mine is not innocent. But the guilty are gone in part, Gabriel. The living will inherit the bill. I was trying to stop a bomb from going off in the middle of our lives." "Our lives," he said coldly. "Was I ever part of that decision?" She did not answer. "You should go upstairs," he told her. "Gabriel, you should go upstairs before I say something that can't be repaired." She looked at him with anger now. Because fear had found pride and dressed in it. "If there is anything beneath that chapel tied to your mother, what then? You destroy all of us for the dead. If anyone threatens someone in my house again," he said, stepping close enough that she had to tilt her face upward, "you will leave this estate so fast the gravel won't remember your shoes." For the first time a crack appeared in her composure. "Do not talk to me like one of your dockmen," she whispered. "Then stop behaving like one," he answered, and walked away. Morning arrived thin and silver. Frost along the grass, river fog dragging itself up the hill. Nora Mercer came at 7 in an old red pickup spattered with lime dust. Two apprentices unloaded tool cases while she drank coffee from a dented thermos and studied the chapel as if it had already lied to her twice. Gabriel met her at the walkway, handed her the key he had found at dawn in the estate archives after confirming the locksmith had never had it. She raised one eyebrow and said nothing, which somehow felt more condemning than comment. Inside the chapel smelled of cold stone, wax, damp wood, old prayer, and fresh lily. Colored light from the stained glass stretched broken saints across the floor. The altar stood beneath carved oak. Lovely and severe, Nora knelt by the steps. Pulled on work gloves, examined seams. Grain, nails, patched wood. Then made a quiet sound. "This oak doesn't match," she said. Tapping the second step. "Different age? Different cut, and here, see the line." There was a nearly invisible seam running beneath the altar. "It's a hatch," Gabriel said. "It was a hatch," she corrected. "Then somebody pinned it and disguised it." "Old work, careful work. Open it," he said. Within minutes the trim came free, dust lifted, old nails complained. And a narrow cavity appeared beneath the patched wood, empty. Then Nora reached in and withdrew a shred of green silk caught on a splinter. There was a dark rust-brown stain on one edge. Gabriel took it from her, hand shaking once despite himself. His mother had worn green on the last morning he remembered clearly. Soft, dark green, morning light in her hair. Laughter at the breakfast table because Leo had dropped jam on his sleeve, and Gabriel refused a church tie. One of the apprentices called from the organ loft, "Miss Mercer. You should see this." Up the narrow stair they found a rear panel on the neglected organ removed and replaced recently. Nora unscrewed it and opened the maintenance cavity behind the lower pipes. Inside lay a tin box wrapped in oilcloth. In the music room above the ballroom they found the last working cassette deck in the house. Leo sat by the window while Gabriel inserted the tape. "Whose is it?" Leo asked. Gabriel swallowed. "I think it's from Mom," Static hissed. Then a breath, unsteady, close to the microphone. Teresa's voice emerged from 30 years of silence. Low, musical, unmistakably alive in the cruelest possible way. "My boys," she said, "if you are hearing this, then either I was brave enough or cowardly enough to let the future speak for me." Gabriel sat frozen. "When a house is built on fear," Teresa continued, "love becomes a hiding place instead of a room. I am trying to leave your father before he teaches either of you to mistake power for safety. If I fail, know this, Gabriel, you were never hard by nature. Don't let anyone praise you into becoming stone. Leo, the world will call quiet weakness. It is not. It means you hear what others waste." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "Your father did not build the river empire honestly. And he did not build it alone. After the Blackwater Row fire, he and Charles Thorne acquired parcels that did not legally belong to them. Some deeds were forged, some claims extinguished by intimidation. Some compensation accounts opened and emptied before the money reached widows and workers. Your grandmother learned enough to hate it and too late to stop it. What she could do, she did in secret. I persuaded Sophia to sign a trust assigning a portion of future waterfront profits to the families harmed and the workers whose pension club was raided. The executed trust is not in this box. Neither are the original ledgers. I moved them after realizing Salvatore was watching the chapel. Albert Mercer helped me. He said Wood remembers what men bury. If there is ever a Mercer working in this house when you listen to this, trust the hands, not the name. If your grandmother lives long enough to repent aloud, forgive her if you can. She chose the boys over the truth when Salvatore threatened Leo. That is love, but not innocence. If I disappear, I did not run from you. I ran toward the only chance I saw for you. I hid the main records where water remembers names. Sophia knows the hymn. Leo will hear it. A muffled sound on the tape. A door perhaps, quick steps. Teresa lowered her voice urgently. There isn't time, Gabriel. Don't become your father just because anger fits your hands. And if the woman you love ever asks you to bury this again, she is not beside you. She is standing where he stood. The tape clicked off. Silence consumed the room. Leo cried without sound, tears sliding down his face as if they had started without his permission. Nora, who had stood near the door, said quietly, "My husband's grandfather was Albert Mercer," Leo whispered. Water remembers names. They found the old 1987 hymnal in the sacristy drawer. Hymn 12, Shall We Gather at the River? Hymn 41, Abide With Me. Hymn 63. I heard the voice of Jesus say. On page 41, a faded handwritten note in Sophia's hand read, Cistern key with organ spare. On page 63, a penciled list of surnames barely visible remained: Mercer, Cruz, Bell, Santiago, Doyle. Ophelia entered behind them, saw the page and went pale. I forgot that existed, she whispered. Sophia wrote the names after the fire. She used the hymnal because Salvatore never opened anything that looked holy. The old conservatory behind the east wing was half ruin, half memory. Broken glass above, moss at the tile edges. Winter light filtering through iron ribs. Near the center, a rectangular stone slab sat too deliberately among the cracked floor. Nora brushed away dead leaves and found an iron ring. Together she and Gabriel lifted the slab. Cold, damp air rose from below, carrying the mineral smell of earth and old water. Stone steps vanished into darkness below. The circular cistern chamber held only a shallow black sheen along one side. Damp brick, echo and names carved by hand into mortar just above eye level. Mercer, Cruz, Bell, Santiago, Doyle, a litany of the erased. She brought me here once, Leo said softly, touching one of the names. I thought it was a dream. At the far wall, a narrow wooden bench was bolted into brick. The underside newer than everything else around it. Nora removed hidden screws and lifted the lower board. Inside lay a flat cash box wrapped in waxed cloth. Upstairs in the pale winter light they opened it. Inside were ledgers, sworn statements,
Forged release copies, payment records, pension withdrawals, parcel maps. A notarized executed restitution trust signed by Sophia Vale and Teresa, witnessed by Albert Mercer and Elena Cruz.
and beneath it all a sealed envelope in Sophia's severe hand, for Gabriel. When he is old enough to know that mercy without courage is merely polished fear. Gabriel broke the seal and read. Sophia's confession spilled across 6 pages. She wrote that Salvatore and Charles used the Blackwater Row fire as a market event. That shell buyers acquired scorched parcels before probate settled. That forged releases took land from families who had never agreed to sell. That when financing failed, Salvatore raided the household pension pool and never repaid it. That Teresa found proof and forced Sophia to create a trust in secret. That Charles learned enough to know it existed and threatened Leo's freedom through bought doctors and private facilities. That on the night Teresa tried to leave, Salvatore confronted her in the chapel. There was a struggle. Teresa cut her side on the altar step. Albert got her out through the conservatory passage while Sophia delayed Salvatore in the house. That Teresa refused a hospital because records would expose her location. That Sophia hid her for 12 days at the river house at St. Agnes Point under her mother's surname, Bell, and that infection took her before the month ended. Teresa dying while asking again and again for her boys. Sophia burying not the body but the truth because she could not bear the world seeing what her fear had cost. When Gabriel finished reading, the conservatory had become impossibly quiet. Even the tapping of branches against broken panes sounded far away. "What do you need first?" Nora asked. That more than pity, more than outrage, steadied him. "Copies," he said. 3 sets, 1 for my attorney. 1 for the State Financial Crimes Unit, 1 for the board. By noon the small North Library held 3 lawyers. A forensic accountant, and Judge Miriam Sloan. A retired federal judge who owed Gabriel one favor and believed in using it only when rot reached the beams. Gabriel moved them through the evidence with ruthless order.
The forged parcel releases, the pension theft, the executed trust.
Mercer's affidavit, Sophia's letter. At the end the judge removed her glasses and said, "If this trust is valid, decades of waterfront profits should have been segregated if they were not. This liability will swallow dynasties. I only need it to swallow the right one," Gabriel replied. His counsel Adrian Pike said, "Charles will argue defective filing, dead witnesses, broken custody, emotional fabrication, governance sabotage. He can argue with her handwriting," Gabriel said. Touching Sophia's letter, "He will," Adrian answered. "Then freeze the redevelopment escrow before he moves it. That means injunction papers within hours," Adrian said. "Then file," Gabriel replied. In the corridor afterward, Nora waited with 2 mugs of coffee stolen, no doubt, from a kitchen that no longer belonged morally to the family whose silver it polished. She handed him one and said, "You look like a man who has just sold his weather." He almost smiled. "I haven't sold anything yet. You've decided to," she said. Before he could answer, footsteps sounded. Evelyn approached in cream wool and pearls, pale, composed. Every line of her body disciplined into elegance. She saw Nora, saw Gabriel, saw the closed library door, and understood enough to lose color. "Is that where the funeral is?" she asked. "That depends on whose name is on the stone," Gabriel said. "That depends on whose name, That depends on whose name is on the stone," Gabriel said. "We need to speak privately," Evelyn said. "We need witnesses," he replied. He told her he had found the trust, Sophia's letter. Proof Teresa died after trying to expose their fathers. For the first time Evelyn looked genuinely stricken. "Died," she repeated. The word rougher than anything he had ever heard from her. "Yes." She closed her eyes, then opened them with grief stitched into strategy. "My father didn't know that. If he had known, he would have used it. He is too vain to waste certainty." "You expect relief?" Gabriel asked. "No, I expect you to understand danger. If you move on him, he will attack chain of custody, mental fitness, governance. And Leo." At Leo's name Gabriel's face changed. Evelyn pressed on. He keeps clinicians on retainer.
Quiet facilities. Competency specialists.
If he thinks Leo can sway sympathy or votes, he will have him labeled fragile, manipulated, incapable.
That was always the true weapon.
And you stood beside him, Gabriel said. I stood where I could still see the knife, she answered. Fear finally outrunning pride. I found the memorandum 6 months ago. I told him we should settle quietly before the peer deal closed. He refused.
Said once I married you, we would have enough control to bury the old files permanently and pay.
Small private settlements were useful.
I delayed you because I thought if I could get through the wedding and the board transition, I might still contain him.
That is a polished word for collaboration, Gabriel said. Yes, Evelyn answered. The honesty landed harder than denial. He's meeting the board at the Hudson Club at 4, she said. If you intend to break him, do it there. In public rooms, charm makes him careless. Why tell me? Gabriel asked. Her mouth tried for a smile and failed.
Because I loved you and then I loved winning with you.
And somewhere in that order I became someone I would not trust alone in a quiet room. Choose whichever explanation makes hating me easier. And if I go to that meeting, he said. I end us. I know, she answered, then walked away without looking back.
The Hudson Club was all limestone, brass, and old arrogance.
A place where money wore manners like a tuxedo.
At 358, the main conference room held Charles Thorne.
Vale Marine directors, city attorneys, a mayoral aide, consultants, and a Boston banker, smiling the smile of a man who had never personally lifted anything heavier than a consequence he could pass to someone else. Gabriel entered with Adrian Pike, Judge Sloan, Nora Mercer, and Leo.
At the sight of Nora, Charles's brows rose slightly. At the sight of Leo, he smiled.
That smooth, murderous smile of men who think courtesy is sufficient camouflage for cruelty. You brought family, Charles said. How heartwarming. I brought witnesses, Gabriel answered. Taking the seat opposite him, renderings of the new waterfront gleamed on screens. Sleek towers where Blackwater Row once stood. Green promenades over stolen grief, glass luxury over erased names. Shall we begin? Charles asked. No, Gabriel said.
First we discussed chain of title fraud, pension theft,
and an unfiled restitution trust executed in 1993 and suppressed by multiple parties, including you. The room froze. Packets slid across the table.
Directors opened them. City lawyers opened them. The banker opened his and stopped smiling on page 3.
Charles placed both hands flat on the table. This is outrageous, Judge Sloan said. It is also documented. My mother left better records than you expected, Gabriel told him.
Something in Charles's face changed then.
The performance thinning. Teresa, he said softly. This is about Teresa. It was always about Teresa, Gabriel replied. Charles leaned back, gathering contempt like a coat. Your father is dead. Your grandmother is dead. The carpenter is dead. You think family melodrama and half-rotted paper threaten a modern corporate structure. The injunction I filed 40 minutes ago freezing the redevelopment escrow may help, Gabriel said. One consultant swore under his breath. The banker shut his folder entirely. Charles turned toward the directors.
You see what this is? Gabriel is destabilized.
Compromised by personal grief and a family situation requiring delicacy. His gaze flicked toward Leo.
Say what you mean, Gabriel said. Charles sighed for the room. Your brother is vulnerable, easily led, impressionistic in recollection. If governance decisions are now to rest on the sensitivities of a fragile man and the affidavit of a dead handyman.
Nora spoke. Voice level as a measurement line. My dead handyman kept duplicate notches on his bench tools whenever he witnessed work he thought might someday need proving.
The chapel hatch patch matches the date on his affidavit.
The blood trace in the splinter has been preserved. If you need me to explain timber age analysis slowly enough for your vanity to keep up, I can. Heads turned toward her, she continued. And before you call quiet people fragile, you should know they are often the only ones who notice where the rest of you hid the nails. Leo looked at her. Surprised, then calmer. Charles snapped. Who are you to lecture me in my boardroom? The daughter-in-law of a man your friend underpaid for 30 years while calling him family, she replied. Eleanor Bryce, senior director, looked up sharply. Charles, did you know about the pension pool? He ignored her, which was his first mistake. His second came when he reached instinctively not for the trust papers but for the sheet. Listing present offshore transfers tied to the redevelopment reserve. Gabriel saw it, Adrian saw it, and most importantly the Boston banker saw it. Are there present tense diversion issues here? The banker asked flatly. Adrian slid forward another document. We believe so, same architecture. Newer wrappers. Charles stood too fast, chair scraping backward. This meeting is over. No, Eleanor Bryce said quietly. With the kind of authority that had outlived louder men? It is beginning. Phones came out. City lawyers stepped aside to call their office. The mayoral aide announced suspension of the project review. Charles looked around the room like a man discovering betrayal was not personal but atmospheric. Then his gaze fixed on Gabriel and all polish burned away. You self-righteous boy, he said. You think you survived this intact. The banks will strip you. The unions will panic.
Those families want money, not absolution.
In the end you will still be what your father made you, only poorer. Gabriel rose slowly.
Every eye in the room on him. No, he said.
Poorer would be if I kept it. The next 10 days tore the city open.
First the whispers, then the names, then the ledgers. Then the faces of Blackwater Row descendants on local television. Then the interviews with former staff whose pension accounts had vanished into early financing pools. Then the photographs of the old neighborhood before the fire. Then the questions no one in power could brush aside anymore. Families came forward, some furious, some numb. Some exhausted by being right too late.
Some wanting cash. Some wanting admission. Some wanting the names spoken publicly in places that had once profited from their silence. Gabriel gave what he could. Money through the trust. Records through the courts. Apology through his own mouth, without the insulation of public relations language. The wedding was postponed first, then ended.
Evelyn left before dawn 2 days later.
She left the ring on a ledger in the library where Gabriel had learned arithmetic under Sophia's eye. No letter, no plea.
Months later, he heard she had left her father's foundation and taken work in housing litigation in Chicago. He never confirmed it. Some stories do not improve under witness.
Charles fought in exactly the way drowning men of power always fight, with lawsuits, editorials, leaks, insinuations, procedural delay, moral sneering, and a brief poisonous attempt to question Leo's competency. That final move destroyed what remained of him more efficiently than any affidavit. Leo, who hated cameras, gave one statement seated in the music room beside the old cassette deck. Hands clasped white, voice gentle and devastating. I was taught that confusion in a child is useful to adults who need silence. I am not confused about my mother. I am not confused about what fear did in this family. And I am not confused about who benefits when people like me are described as too delicate to remember. The clip traveled everywhere. Within a week, Charles resigned from boards, faced subpoenas, watched polite society decide he was more dangerous to stand beside than to abandon. Power left him in layers, invitations first, then deference, then certainty. Gabriel did what Sophia had asked at the end of her letter. He sold Blackwater House, not all at once, not carelessly. First he carved out the chapel, conservatory, cistern, and surrounding acres into a non-profit parcel. Then restored the Blackwater Trust under joint governance, descendants of harmed families, former staff representatives, 2 independent trustees, and only limited veil influence. The first distributions were not enough to repair generations, but they were real, public, documented, and immune to private burial. The rest of the estate went to a preservation buyer who wanted tax benefits and Gothic romance. Gabriel did not care why, only that the deed no longer carried the illusion of blessing. Vale Marine survived, smaller, angrier, cleaner. Gabriel surrendered majority control to fund settlements and trust obligations without stripping the workforce to save appearances. The board called him reckless until markets steadied and the unions, after one stunned week, decided not to abandon. A man who cut his own inheritance before touching their pensions. That winter he drove alone to St. Agnes Point. The river house was gone. Storms had taken it years ago. Only the chapel cemetery remained on the rise above the water. Bent cedar, wild grass silver with frost, and a modest stone. Teresa Bell. Born 1960. Died 1993. Beloved daughter. Beloved mother. The river carries what we cannot. Gabriel stood there a long time, not knowing what posture grief required after 30 years of deception. In the end, he sat on the cold grass and told her everything. Leo was playing again without locking the door. Ophelia still oversalted soup when nervous. Sophia had been a coward and not only a villain. He had nearly married a woman who mistook containment for love. And he could not hate her cleanly because part of him understood the temptation. He told Teresa he was tired. That truth had not felt noble so much as necessary. That justice had arrived wearing invoices, subpoenas, and old names carved into damp brick. When he finished, the sky had darkened toward evening and a thermos cap clicked behind him. "Coffee," Nora said. "You look like someone trying to negotiate with weather." He turned. She stood there in battered boots and a heavier coat. Face composed in that way she had when entering other people's pain. No pity, no performance, only presence. "How did you know I was here?" he asked. "You asked my firm to inspect the cemetery wall next week," she said. "I assumed either business had become poetic or you had. Which is worse?" "Too early to tell," she replied. Then sat beside him on the grass at a respectful distance from the grave and a less respectful one from him. They said nothing for a while. 6 months had passed since the Hudson Club meeting. 6 months in which she stabilized the chapel, cataloged the cistern carvings, argued with accountants, laughed exactly 4 times in his hearing and meant every one of them. Once after a 14-hour day in the library, she had fallen asleep in a chair with plaster dust on her sleeve, while he watched fire collapse into ember and felt something settle in him where strategy usually lived. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "Your mother didn't know me," Nora answered, looking toward the river. "No," Gabriel said. "But she trusted hands." "So do I." Nora absorbed that quietly, then said, "You are getting better at saying important things without making them sound like a threat." "That obvious to me," she replied. "The rest of civilization may need more time," he laughed. "Rusty from disuse. Stay for dinner," he said. "This is a cemetery," she answered. "Not here. There's a place on Route 9 with disgraceful meatloaf and honest pie. Romantic. Terrible. Actually, good," she said, standing and brushing frost from her gloves. "I distrust men who become poetic too quickly." He rose with her. And at the gate he looked back once more at the stone. Not for forgiveness, not for permission. Only to mark that the lie had ended and his life had not ended with it. By spring the chapel reopened. Not as a veil shrine but as a memorial and archive for the Blackwater families and the workers, whose names had been hidden in the cistern wall. On dedication day, Leo played the 3 hymns Teresa had hidden in numbers and merged them into one spare haunting piece that made half the room cry before they understood why. Gabriel stood at the back with Nora beside him. When his turn came, he spoke briefly. Buildings were not innocent because they were beautiful. Families were not redeemed by secrecy. Wealth was not legacy unless it could survive the truth. Then he stepped aside and let the names be read later. When the crowd had thinned and blue evening light poured through the chapel glass, he found Nora near the altar step, restored now, but no longer disguised. "You're thinking too loudly," she said without turning. "How can you tell?" "Your shoulders," she answered. He came to stand beside her. "Do you ever worry all I've done is rearrange the damage into a nobler shape?" She considered that. As she considered everything, without rushing to comfort him merely because discomfort was present. "Yes,"
she said at last, probably because history is greedy. But I also think there is a difference between inheritance and obedience. The last light caught in her eyes then.
And Gabriel, who had spent most of his life mistaking control for clarity,
understood that some moments should not be managed into speeches.
So he did not speak further, he simply reached for her hand. She let him take it. Outside, harbor bells drifted faintly through the pines.
And below the hill the river kept moving. Carrying names, carrying ruin, carrying memory,
carrying whatever people were finally brave enough to stop burying.